everybody. Wow, this is all for Pete. I know, it's all for, we like to call him Secretary Mayor Pete. All right, good afternoon, everyone. Good to see everybody. Joining us today, Transportation Secretary Pete Buttigieg, who, surprise, surprise, is here to talk about the president's bipartisan infrastructure deal. I don't want to steal the secretary's thunder, but as you all know, the once-in-a-generation bill is the largest ever federal investment in public transit, clean energy transmission, and electric vehicle infrastructure, and clean drinking water. It delivers for the American people by rebuilding our roads, railroads, and rail cars, bridges, buses, ports, and airports, all while creating good paying union jobs. With that, I'll turn it over to Secretary Buttigieg. This isn't his first time at the podium, as you all know. I think this might be his third time, but it's his first time joining us as a father. So on a personal note, congratulations to you and Chasten on the birth of Gus and Penelope, and the news last week, which we, really thought that was wonderful, great news. And so with that, I'm really happy to introduce you. Here you go.
Thank you. Good afternoon, everybody. Good afternoon. And thank you, Corrine, and thanks for the chance to address you. We are so thrilled, so excited. When our communications team presents me with a copy, I usually cross out the word excited because I think it's overused, and I often rub out the exclamation points because it's not always my style, but we are excited with an exclamation point about what we're going to be able to deliver. We are so thankful to everybody who's played a role in this, thanks to members of Congress on both sides of the aisle. President Biden's historic bipartisan infrastructure deal will now become the law of the land. And it couldn't come at a more urgent time. I can tell you in the 10 months that I've been in this job, I have traveled the country and seen the state of our infrastructure firsthand. I saw mesh nets hung under bridges to catch pieces of concrete that fall off from time to time, century-old tunnels corroded by seawater that hundreds of thousands of people depend on every day, roads where community members are installing memorials to lives lost in preventable traffic crashes, highways that have cut communities in two. Infrastructure is so elemental to our society that when it's not there to serve us in the right way, all of us are impacted. But when it is, when it's strong, every community, large and small, rural and urban, privileged and marginalized, every community feels the benefits. When combined with the Build Back Better Act, the bipartisan infrastructure deal, which collectively I like to think of them as the big deal, an answer to the New Deal or the Square Deal before that, they're going to create a generation of good union jobs. They're going to make historic investments in equity and in the fight against climate change. They're going to make sure that America can compete and win in the decades ahead. This is the largest investment in roads, bridges, and highways since the creation of the interstate highway system, including the largest investment in our bridges ever, so that we can avoid devastating closures and disruptive collapses like we've seen, including what we saw in Tennessee and Florida and far too many other places. It's also the largest investment in public transit ever, with funding that will expand service to communities of all sizes, including improvements for seniors and for people with disabilities. It's going to replace thousands of outdated buses with clean zero-emission vehicles and aging rail cars with state-of-the-art new ones. It's the largest investment in passenger rail since the creation of Amtrak itself, and transformative impacts in traffic safety will be achieved. And it's going to strengthen our supply chain by improving our ports, our airports, and our freight rail. It's going to dramatically increase funding for major projects. Every year we have our discretionary programs, RAISE and Infra, where we support projects that are vitally important for local economic development and the national supply chain. We're going through the current round of applications for RAISE right now. And for every dollar that we have to give out, there are about 10 in impressive applications coming in. This allows us to grow those programs that we can use in very direct ways to address the issues of our time. I'll give you an example from the Infra round of grants that happened earlier this year. We announced funding for a project in Georgia. It's an inland port to help goods move onward from the port of Savannah. It is to create a new 300-plus mile freight connection between the seaport and the inland port that makes it faster to get the goods out of the port and then sort them so that they can get on the way to shelves. But like I said, for every good project like this, there are many more that are worthy but that we can't support. This helps us to change that. Later today, I'll be headed to Glasgow, and there look forward to discussing how this legislation can help ensure that transportation, which is the biggest sector contributing greenhouse gases in our economy, can be a big part of the solution. We've seen so many impacts of climate change on American lives, on our transportation systems themselves, and that's part of why this plan includes funding to put people to work electrifying our power grid, make our infrastructure more resilient to extreme weather, and build out a national network of 500,000 electric vehicle chargers and expand public transit, as I mentioned earlier, which is also a huge part of the climate solution. And of course, there's a lot beyond our transportation elements of this: lead pipes, cleaning up pollution, broadband, and more. But what all of these investments have in common is that they will create jobs. Pipe fitters to replace those pipes, electricians to install those EV charging stations, auto workers to build the cars that plug into them. We need mechanics maintaining transit vehicles, drivers operating them, construction workers rebuilding those roads and bridges. And most of those jobs will be available whether you have a college degree or not, which is why the president often talks about this as a blue-collar blueprint for American competitiveness. And it's a generational investment in every sense of the word, something that means a lot more to me now as a new father, because this is how we do right by the next generation before it's too late. So thanks again, and eager to take some questions.
All right, go ahead, John.
Secretary Buttigieg, thanks for being with us. Congrats on the birth of your children. A question about the bill. This bill gives your department an unprecedented amount of discretionary funds, $100 billion in competitive grants. Can you spell out how you plan to prioritize that money, and just give us a sense of what projects you see or we should expect to see getting money and getting started first?
Yeah, so our department has been gearing up, hoping that this bill would pass, and now that it has, we've taken it to the next level. I would break it into two parts. Part of it is handling increased funding for programs we already have, like discretionary programs such as RAISE, formerly known as Tiger, and Infra. There, what you're going to see, within the framework, of course, that the law puts forward, is an emphasis on projects that, taken together, give us extra value in the priorities of this administration: economic strength, safety, climate, equity, preparing for the future. And we see a lot of projects that overlap in that sense. Again, if you look to what we funded with the last round of Infra, that'll give you a sense, and you'll see that when we announce the RAISE projects for this year too. But we'll have so much more to work with. Then there are areas where we have to stand up whole new programs. Safe Streets for All. We've never had a multi-billion-dollar safety initiative like that. Reconnecting communities, which we've been talking about all year, responding to where sometimes it was federal dollars that divided a community, often along racial lines. I think the intent of those programs is clear, but the mechanics of those, we've got to work very hard to make sure that we get it right, that the criteria are transparent, that it is easy to understand how to apply, whether you are a big city with full-time staff here in Washington, D.C., or a small rural community trying to navigate that federal process. And of course, that all those dollars are spent accountably, because we're talking about a lot of taxpayer money.
Do you have something in place? Sorry, just a quick follow-up. Do you have something in place to prevent mismanagement of that money and fraud?
Absolutely, yeah, and that's something that I know is also happening at the administration level. There will be, and the president made this very clear to us in the cabinet when the rescue plan dollars came through. We know that we're going to be held to a very high standard by the president as well as the public. So we have an executive council with the deputy secretary and undersecretary, as well as myself, paying close attention to how we can make sure we have all of the right controls, the right rigor to make sure these dollars are spent well.
Secretary Mayor Pete, could you give us the breakdown of the implementation of Justice 40 with the infrastructure package that's now passed and signed into law? And also, can you give us the construct of how you will deconstruct the racism that was built into the roadways that you talked to the Griot earlier when you broke that information with us? Can you talk to us about how that could be deconstructed?
For sure, yeah. So the principle of Justice 40 is that at least 40% of the clean investments in this bill will go to benefit the communities that are overburdened and underserved. So part one of that is defining those investments that are eligible, and that's a lot of it, and we're working to map out kind of program by program, mode by mode, what would qualify. For example, if we're buying clean buses, right? How do we make sure, in terms of where those buses go, but also looking at the business opportunity, the jobs that are going to be created, the businesses that will have a chance to compete for the business opportunities it creates. That too, I think, is a very important element of equity here that's in the spirit of Justice 40. And again, we have a lot of guidance and oversight from the White House, since that's an administration-wide initiative. We know that we've got to build our own internal kind of ways of aligning and defining that inside the administration. As to where we target those dollars, I'm still surprised that some people were surprised when I pointed to the fact that if a highway was built for the purpose of dividing a white and a black neighborhood, or if an underpass was constructed such that a bus carrying mostly black and Puerto Rican kids to a beach, or it would have been, in New York was designed too low for it to pass by, that obviously reflects racism that went into those design choices. I don't think we have anything to lose by confronting that simple reality, and I think we have everything to gain by acknowledging it and then dealing with it, which is why the Reconnecting Communities, that $1 billion, is something we want to get to work right away, putting to work.
But that's such a heavy lift. I mean, you have to reconstruct communities that this happened to. As you said, some of these beltways and interstates and roadways were built before the Civil Rights Act, before the Voting Rights Act, and were meant to be racist. But how do you go about redefining and replanning these roadways and communities that are already settled in since then?
So what's interesting is it's going to vary by community, and we have to listen to the community. Sometimes it really is the case that an overpass went in a certain way that is so harmful that it's got to come down or maybe be put underground. Other times, maybe it's not that way. Maybe the really important thing is to connect across it, to add rather than subtract. And that's where we don't want to impose a one-size-fits-all answer from here. But when we were out in Syracuse, for example, looking at I-81, we saw the local vision for how they want to get past those divisions. And those local ideas are going to be taken very seriously as we try to meet the spirit of this law.
Thank you, Secretary Buttigieg. You just said this bill and the passage of it could not come at a more urgent time. So do you know when President Biden plans to sign this bill?
I'd have to refer you to my White House colleagues on that, but I'll tell you that I'll be there with bells on.
But he has not signed the bill yet, right?
Okay.
And can you talk about what the campaign to sell this bill is going to look like, given it will take time for some of these projects to actually go into effect and to be completed? And the White House is 1 year out from the midterms, of course, which they have tied this bill to.
Well, I expect that that'll be led by the president traveling to show where the need is and where the action is. But I'm certainly eager to be part of that effort. I mean, look, a lot of this sells itself because communities never needed to be persuaded that their bridge needed to be fixed or that their airport needed an upgrade or that their ports needed investment. They've been trying to get Washington to catch up to them. But I do think it's important for us to go out there, especially in communities where a member of Congress or the Senate played an important role. And as you know, members from both sides of the aisle played important roles in delivering this bipartisan win. And I can't wait to be out there celebrating good news.
Let's take one from the back.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Secretary, and thank you, Corinne. As you pointed out, this was a bipartisan bill. Was there any discussion of the president not letting Democrats oppose some of the Republicans who are running or giving them a pass in the next election?
Not that I've been part of, but what I'll say is that, we're really proud of the bipartisan character of this bill. And, the conversations that we had, it wasn't transactional like that. It didn't have to be because these investments were already so good for the communities that these members represented. There are times when you ask somebody to take a tough vote. To me, these provisions were rightly so popular that the only thing that was tough was for some Republicans to stand up to those who wanted them to choose party over what was right for their community.
So there was no discussion from your side about the partisanship of it?
I don't ever remember talking about, when I was talking to any member of either chamber of either party, talking about campaigns and elections in that way. What we talked about was how it would be good. Now, of course, I believe strongly that good policy is good politics, and I think it's going to reflect well on anybody who voted to deliver these big wins and these jobs for their communities. But I think that's just clear on its face from it being such good legislation.
Good. I wanted to ask about the money for ports in the bill.
For what, sorry?
The money for
ports, yeah.
in the bill. How will that help the supply chain issues that the U.S. is facing right now? I know that's something that you've said often when you're talking about the supply chain is that help.
Yeah, let me offer a couple examples. I mean, one is that we need to make sure our ports are as efficient as possible, right? And there are cases where more technology, sometimes physical technology around the berths, but sometimes it's more to do with the systems that help the different players talk to each other. Remember, port's not a single entity, right? You got the port itself, which is kind of like a landlord. Then you got the terminal operators, then you got the truckers, and all of them are interacting with competing shipping companies, right, to try to efficiently move these containers. They need to be able to exchange and share data. We'll definitely want to support ways to do that. So that's an example. Some of it's multimodal. If you see a backup of ships at a port, it might actually be because of something that's not so much on board the ships, but inland. That's why I was pointing to that example in Savannah, serving Savannah, where we have an inland port so you can rush those containers out of that precious port space and then sort them out, and then it'll be more efficient and more speedy. So those are a couple examples. Let me point to one third thing, the idea of the Healthy Ports Initiative. So there are a lot of emissions around ports, from the ships themselves, from the trucks, from the equipment. And right now, one thing that is tough is the neighborhoods that are close to them feel that impact, including in increased asthma rates in what are, by the way, disproportionately Black and Latino neighborhoods. The Healthy Ports Initiative helps electrify them so that you don't have to worry about the emissions. And to me, that goes hand in hand with those efficiency gains that we're trying to drive.
I wanted to follow up also, you mentioned truckers. Have you thought about at all relaxing motor carrier regulations further to allow people 18 to 20 to participate and to be truck drivers?
So I believe there is a provision in this legislation. Yeah, exactly. But we got to be very careful about safety. And so the way the provision works is it's a mentorship type, apprenticeship type of initiative that tries to manage the potential for there to be a safety trade-off. We want as many people to be qualified drivers as possible, but never at the expense of safety. And we'll always look at other steps we can take. But let me mention, we've got to just make truck driving a better job. Truck drivers, there's a reason the turnover is so high. And the way they're compensated, they're often not compensated for their time, which means that their time is wasted freely, sometimes when they're waiting for a load at a port, for example. Truckers have not had the option to work from home on Zoom. They are the absolute backbone of a big part of our supply chain. We need to respect and, in my view, compensate them better than we have.
Thank you.
Thank you, Secretary Buttigieg. President Biden said Americans will start seeing the effects of the infrastructure bill within 2 to 3 months. Is that also your assessment? And just to follow up on Jeff's question, can you provide a more detailed timeline on when specific programs will go into effect?
So again, I would break it into the existing programs that we're just going to be able to plus up, and then the new ones that we're going to have to stand up. So with something like infra, raise, I think that sees more than a twofold increase in the authorized funding. So here you have, and by the way, they're not waiting on us in Washington to invent these construction projects, right? The communities are applying with them, and then we're just able to fund that many more. And we're already, even though I'm going through the applications for this year's raise program now, we will, in very short order, be working on next year's, and you'll see a notice go out. But again, some things, we need to stand up a whole new program. Safe Streets for All, Reconnecting Communities, Healthy Ports. And so that will take a little bit longer. Remember, this isn't 2009. This is an era where it's about making sure we hit every shovel-ready program to provide that immediate short-term boost for the economy. It's short-term, but it's long-term. That's why the president talks about looking back on this moment from the 2050s.
Just to follow up on that, we were down in Mississippi talking to farmers who have had bridges closed down in their area for 2 or 3 years. So when exactly can Americans expect to see a difference in their lives? Will it be 2 to 3 months, or will it be sometime sooner?
Well, that's the beginning, right? I mean, the short answer is as fast as many of these agencies and workforces can absorb those dollars when the formula increases or when a new grant is available. So some things soon, but again, this is about many, many years ahead, starting now.
Secretary? You go first and then.
Quick follow-up on Jeff's question. On when you're reviewing the applications, do you have adequate staff at DOT to review all the applications all together? And then I have one more question.
Great question. Yes, but we're going to have to grow as well. And that's one of the things we've been working on, is how to make sure we're staffed up properly and how to make sure we're organized properly. I mean, we're talking about, I believe, $660 billion over that stretch of years that we need to manage responsibly. Of course, there's an admin dimension of that to make sure that we have the right staffing, human power.
In terms of the highway money that will go directly to states, is there something that you can do to encourage or to make sure that that money isn't used to just widen roads and encourage more people to drive? Because I know that's been a concern of some of the progressives in the transportation community.
Right. I mean, this is not just about adding. This is about being smarter in terms of how people move around. Now, the best way to allow people to move in ways that are better for congestion and better for climate is to give them alternatives. So I know our transit funding doesn't sound like a highway policy, but actually part of what takes the pressure off the highways is this unprecedented historic funding for transit, right? Having said that, we're certainly, when there's any discretion involved, so especially on the discretionary programs, we're going to think about what's really going to help solve the problem. Sometimes you add lanes to a road, you just get that many more cars, and you're no better off in terms of congestion or pollution. We're also interested in some of the performance measures that are being contemplated as part of the second round. But with this legislation, we definitely have the tools to make a positive difference on that front.
Thank you. Mr. Secretary, spinning forward to the next bit of legislation, the larger social safety net bill. The House version of that legislation includes paid family leave. The Senate has indicated it will be stripped out. They didn't make the President's framework a couple of weeks ago. You just came off some family leave. That's something you can talk to about the benefits of that. And then number one, and then number two, given your experience, do you think that it should be a red line for the President to keep that in there so that all Americans have access to that benefit?
Well, the President put forward a framework that he's confident can pass the House and the Senate. I think it's also no secret how I feel about family leave and how the President does, which is why he proposed it, I think campaigned on it, and will continue to fight for it. And the importance of it is that it's talked about as time off. It's time to do work. Good work, joyful work, meaningful work, but it's time to do important work. But let me also say, as a new parent, thinking about the difference that will be made by what's in the framework, the universal access to 3 and 4 year old preschool, making childcare affordable for families across the spectrum. That child tax credit, I mean, that's going to be huge, and it's going to make such a big difference for new parents.
Last question, Josh.
Hi, thank you. Can we circle back to your other hat as supply chain, on the trucker issue, the Teamsters have said that these truckers should be unionized, should be treated like other stakeholders. Do you agree with that? Should they be able to unionize?
Well, we're very pro-union. One of the things we're proud of is how this legislation will create more good-paying union jobs. And I think truckers who are unionized have more of those protections in terms of their health, in terms of their compensation, and that has a lot of benefits in terms of their effectiveness. Look, if you have an industry with 90% turnover, 90% per year turnover at the larger employers of truckers, there's clearly an issue with the quality of the job. And one tool for improving the quality of that job is union representation.
The administration has been silent on the Teamsters specific call for this. So you're endorsing the short haul truck drivers?
I don't know if you're applying that to a particular employer, but what I would say is that we believe in what unions can do to enhance the standing of workers in any industry, and but also for independent truck drivers. I mean, it's very clear that there's an issue with what happens when they get to the gate of a port, for example, and that largely has to do with compensation structures across the industry that are over and above what the union issue speaks to.
Bottlenecks are still in Los Angeles and Long Beach, or are they moving in the most recent weeks as steps have been taken to sort of ease the congestion?
So I think we've certainly seen, we've seen some steps that are, we think, making a big difference there in terms of moves to clear the containers, obviously the 24/7 ops. But look, the bottom line is, and I think this is important, not everybody may be following this, it's not that the ports are moving less goods, that they've somehow been less able to move. They're moving more goods than ever. It's just that it's still not keeping up with the demand. National Retail Federation predicts an all-time record high this year, and that's enormous pressure. And whenever you have enormous pressure on a system, you will find the weakest links in that system. And that, frankly, could pop up at any juncture around the U.S., which is why we're very focused on LA Long Beach, because that's 40% of the containers coming in. But, anywhere, including 1,000 miles inland, at some multimodal facility that's gummed up. I mean, anywhere in the country you can see these issues.
Are they not the bottleneck anymore? Are they not the bottleneck anymore? Is it moving to different?
I guess what I'm saying, it's not a matter of the bottleneck, right? It's a matter, anywhere, literally anywhere in our economy, there is a relationship between a manufacturer, a shipper, and a retailer. There are 1,000 points in that chain where something can go wrong, and we're seeing a lot of those points reveal themselves because of the enormous demand, the constraints on supply, the outdated infrastructure that it all runs across, and then the fact that the pandemic is poking holes in all of the above, which is why the other thing I think is important to point out, having seen shortages in, started with toilet paper, then it was beef last year, the best way to end a pandemic-related shortage is to end the pandemic. And that's why the vaccine push is so important.
Great, thank you so
Thanks.
much.
Thank you.
Thanks again, really great being with you.
Secretary.
Thanks.
Have a sleep.